icebreakers. That sounds a good.
Last thing, what the heck?
Let's call the meeting to order for the January 4th, 2021 Board of Supervisors meeting. Mr. Supervisor Coleman, would you like to lead in the opening prayer?
I would. Thank you. Let us pray. Dear gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you for this another day that you've given us. We thank you for your many blessings that you've bestowed upon us in our community and our country. We pray, God, that your hand continue to be upon us, Lord, as we heal, Lord, from these times. And we pray a blessing, God, upon this new year. And I pray that you bless each one of us to have the measure of wisdom to make the right decisions for our community and move forward. Lord, I thank you for our community and all that you do for us. In Jesus' name we ask and pray. Amen.
Would you please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The first item on the agenda is the election of the chairman for calendar year 2021. Do I have any nominations?
I would like to nominate Lauren Yoder.
Do I have a second on that nomination?
Well, I'm very happy that I've started off the new year with doing a motion and not getting a second. I'd like to keep my track record going.
Do I have any other nominations?
I'd like to nominate Jay Turner.
Do I have a second on that nomination?
Second.
Are there any other nominations for chairman?
I'd like to nominate Jerry Booth.
Are there any seconds to that nomination?
I'll second.
Any other nominations?
I move to close the nominations.
I'll second.
I guess we'll take them in the order the nominations were made. The first one that was made that had a second was for Joe Turman. So I'll just do a roll call vote. Mr. Coleman?
Yes.
Mr. Booth?
Yes.
Mr. Turman?
Yes.
Ms. Cookenbook?
No.
Mr. Yoder?
No.
With that being three, would I go ahead and do the other one in case there were three on that one as well?
It's the first one.
The first one.
First one?
The nomination's been voted on.
Okay. So that makes Supervisor Turman our chairman for the 2021 calendar year, and I turn the meeting over to him. No?
Normally, till you get through the elections,
Oh, okay. Well, then we'll do
isn't that how we've been doing it?
No, we
I've
don't.
been turning it over.
Yes, we have a chair.
I couldn't remember, it's been a year, I didn't know.
It's been an extra year.
It's been a while, but so.
Can you get worse?
No.
All right, next on our agenda would be nomination for vice chairman for the calendar year 2021.
I'd like to nominate Jerry Booth, vice chairman.
Is there any other nominations?
Well, would you ask for a second on that?
Yeah. Do I have a second to your nomination? Hearing none, is there another nomination?
I'll nominate Ms. Cookenbook.
Is there a second to that nomination?
I'll second.
Is that okay? Call the roll.
Mr. Yoder?
Yes.
Mr. Turner? Mr. Coleman?
No.
Ms. Cookenbook?
Yes.
Mr. Booth?
No.
Mr. Turner?
No.
Then you have to open up the nominations
Nomination
again.
again.
I'll nominate Lauren Yoder to be vice chairman.
Hear any more, or a second on that?
Second.
Any other nominations?
I'll nominate Mr. Coleman. You would have it.
I appreciate the hospitality, but don't think my client would be able to best serve the county.
I think you do a good job.
I appreciate that, just struggling to be committed where I am right now, having a family, but I do appreciate that.
So we got two nominations, Jerry and
No,
Mr.
right now, we just have,
Lauren. Oh, Lauren, okay, didn't get a second, Jerry, I'm sorry.
you ready to vote?
Yes,
Mr. Yoder?
Abstain.
Abstain. Ms. Cookenbook?
Yes.
Mr. Coleman?
No,
Mr. Booth?
Yes.
Mr. Turner?
no,
I'll have to break open the book here.
With
We
three
keep
yeses
going
and-
till we get one.
That's right. If you
That's
know
all you
three
can do.
yeses and one abstain, we go at it again.
I'd like to nominate again Mr. Booth.
Well,
If Mr. Chair is for select for nomination.
all right, Mr. Booth, do I have a second?
I'd like to nominate Mr. Yoder.
You're jumping ahead.
Okay.
He's asking for a second.
Oh, okay.
Can you second in this situation, can you second your own?
You have a vote, you can make a second.
You
What?
If you have a vote, you can make a
You can
second.
nominate
So
yourself.
remember,
Yeah, you
board,
can.
yes. you can make a second.
Seriously? Wow.
You can nominate yourself, can't
You
you?
went out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll second for a purpose for a vote.
and not to be too far out of form, but, Mr. Booth, that's exactly all a second means, is that it's worthy of the board's consideration and a vote.
Right.
So, you're completely appropriate.
Ms. Cookenbook?
No.
Mr. Yoder?
Yes.
Mr. Coleman?
Yes.
No, we vote no.
Well, he is
Oh,
vice
Jerry,
chair.
Okay.
I
Right.
vote yes.
Mr. Booth?
Abstain.
Okay, and Mr. Turner?
Yes.
Okay, we finally have a vice chair.
Okay.
9 years, I've never seen that happen.
15.
All right, next is setting a date, time for 2021 regular board of supervisors meeting.
Hopefully the rest of them will be easier than that.
Oh, the fun's just starting next year.
I don't have a problem continuing as we are, as a matter of discussion, but if everybody agrees with that, I'm happy to make that motion.
I think that it's working and with our additional, we've got better ability for people to watch now, so
Yeah.
I don't know that the time is as important as it once was. So.
And the citizens of the county got used to this type.
Yeah.
I'll second Mr. Coleman's motion. You made a motion, didn't you?
I initially said it as a matter of discussion
Oh, okay.
before I moved my motion.
Okay.
But I
He
will
was
be,
feeling it.
I was, yeah, I didn't want to throw it up there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To try to be rude with everybody, but I would formally make that motion and keep the same date and time for our regular board of supervisors meetings, second Tuesday each month and fourth Tuesday each month for our meeting.
8:30 and 7?
Yes, ma'am. 8:30 is the
And that would be on the 2nd and 4th.
fourth, yes.
All right.
Okay, Ms. Cookenbook?
Yes.
Mr. Yoder?
Yes.
Mr. Coleman?
Yes.
Mr. Booth?
Yes.
Mr. Turner?
Yes.
Motion passes.
And if I remember correctly, our inclement weather day is the Thursday following each of those meetings. Is that still agreeable?
Let's go through.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Here's Ron.
Mr. Coleman,
Yes.
Ms. Cookenbook.
Yes.
Mr. Yoder.
Yes.
Mr. Booth.
Yes.
Mr. Turner.
Yes. All right, next is the consideration of Robert's Rules of Order as a meeting protocol. It's about standard, isn't
I don't see any reason to change, do we?
I would ask you to, specify that you're going to use Robert's Rules of Order newly revised for small groups.
So moved.
Because standard Robert's rules, if the chair doesn't vote, you've got to stand when you're making if you ought to stand when you're making motions.
it? Gotcha.
I don't think we
I kind of like that version.
Wow.
Can we get to stand while we're talking?
All right.
You made the
I
motion.
made the motion, yeah.
Justin,
Second.
Please,
Okay. Ms. Cookenbook,
yes.
Mr. Coleman,
Yes.
Mr. Yoder,
Yes.
Mr. Booth,
Yes.
Mr. Turner.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, next is appointment to the Floyd County.
Number 9.
Number 9.
Oh, I didn't, I'm not.
You done marked it out, didn't
Yeah.
you? That's good.
Discussing the format of board minutes.
I like the format myself.
An outstanding job, again.
What we called our format is that we just do highlights and essentials for presentations and discussion, but we do public comments and public hearing verbatim.
Right.
Yep.
Okay.
I move we continue with that if you need a motion to that
I
effect.
think consensus, we've always done it by
Right.
consensus.
I didn't withdraw that.
Now, appointment to the Floyd County Chamber of Commerce, 1-year term, one board of supervisor member, and that's Supervisor Yoder's position.
If he'll accept,
I haven't been able to attend many of their meetings because they're held on a day that, on Monday afternoons, and I usually can't make it. So I have not been able to participate all this year. And I don't really see my schedule changing. They do virtual meetings, their times usually time up almost exactly with something else I have going on. I'm not.
Oh, they are virtual now?
Currently they're doing both. Now, I don't know, they may change back in a few months to
Right.
in person, but they're doing either or. You can do it in person or virtual. But I don't think I'm doing a very good job. I really would love to have the position, but I don't feel like I'm doing justice right now. And that's simply because of the date. It's not because I don't want to do it. I'm actually fairly light. I'm not on that many boards or anything. It's just, it doesn't match up with my schedule very well.
Do we have anybody else interested in that?
You were interested last year a little bit, weren't you? I know you've got a lot going on too.
well, with social services and New River Community Services, being president of Farm Bureau this year, and
Oh,
so,
congratulations.
our condolences, we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, right.
Uh,
How about you?
What day,
Yeah.
what, would you do it?
Yeah, I will. If they can meet virtually, I can, I'll be in Blacksburg at the time, but if I can do it virtual, then I can, attend. Yes,
They've
absolutely.
been doing it virtually. It's usually Monday afternoons. It's just not.
Yeah, I'll do it.
Cause you butt up on that side of the town too, and it's more of a,
Yeah.
I'd make a motion, make a motion we appoint Mrs. Cookenbook to the Floyd County Chamber of Commerce for a 1-year term.
Second.
Motion second.
Mr. Yoder,
Yes.
Mr. Coleman,
Yes.
Ms. Cookenbook,
Oh, same.
Mr. Booth,
Yes.
Mr. Turner.
Yes.
Motion passes.
I'm happy to be on it.
And if, I guess I should say this too. I mean, if y'all have something you want to get rid of, that I would feel free to pass them to me. I don't mind taking on more, I just can't do that day. I'm not trying to get out of work, that's what I'm trying to say.
Well, it's up to you.
And I didn't say that because of yours, but, you know.
Number 11, appointment to Ford County Planning Commission, 1-year term, one board supervisor member, and that's Mr. Collins.
I'm happy there at the board. So moved.
You got a victim you keep.
That's right, you do it fast before they get back up.
Mr. Coleman,
Abstain.
Ms. Cookenbook?
Yes.
Mr. Yoder?
Yes.
Mr. Booth?
Yes.
Mr. Turman?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Appointment to Ford County Tourism Development Council, 2-year term, one board supervisors member, and that's Supervisor Cooper. Here's Vito's position.
I'm fine with that, development council and have enjoyed thoroughly being on it, so
I'll make that
there you
motion.
go.
Second.
Ready? Mr. Booth? Excuse me, Mr. Yoder?
Yes.
Mr. Coleman?
Yes.
Ms. Cookenbook?
Abstain.
Mr. Booth?
Yes.
Mr. Turman?
Yes.
Okay, motion passes.
Appointment of chair and alternate to New River Valley, or New River and Mount Rogers Workforce Development Area Consortium Board of Directors, 1 year.
County administrator's the alternate.
We've had in the past, I don't know if, is that something you want to take on, or do we want
You want to do that
As well.
assistant, or do you want
I wouldn't mind doing it in the interim, but once we have a new county administrator, I'm hoping that person would like to do it.
to, so move? She agreed to that?
if the motion would be that the chair served on that position and the alternate was the acting or county administrator, then it would automatically transfer.
That was my motion.
Okay.
Does that sound right?
Yep.
Well said.
All right, just clarify.
Good.
I didn't get the second.
Ms. Cooper?
I seconded it, yeah.
All right, Mr. Coleman?
Yes.
Ms. Cookenbook?
Yes.
Mr. Yoder?
Yes.
Mr. Booth?
Yes.
Mr. Turman?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Appointment to New River Valley Regional Commission, 1-year term, one board supervisor member, and that's Mr. Coleman's position.
Pleasure to move.
Don't sound so excited.
Make that motion then?
Second?
Ms. Cookenbook?
Yes.
Mr. Yoder?
Yes.
Mr. Coleman?
Abstain.
Mr. Booth?
Yes.
Mr. Turman?
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right, appointment to New River Valley Home Consortium, 1-year term, one board supervisor member. There's Vito's position.
I'll go around again.
So moved.
Second. Fight over.
Mr. Coleman?
Yes.
Ms. Cookenbook?
Abstain.
Mr. Yoder?
Yes.
Mr. Booth?
Yes.
Mr. Turman?
Yes.
Motion passes.
The appointment of VACO legislative contact, 1-year term, one board supervisor member, and that's the chairman of the board council.
So moved.
Second?
Ms. Cookenbook?
Yes.
Mr. Yoder?
Yes.
Mr. Coleman?
Yes.
Mr. Booth?
Yes.
Mr. Turman?
I'll abstain on that one.
Motion passes.
5 minutes still, we get a break.
Southern turns up.
Yep.
Yeah, we can wait till 6 in the
Unless you want to start talking to interest in
Yes.
5 minutes.
I have a question that Linda originally raised earlier today. Do we need to amend the agenda for a closed session?
Yep.
Yes, I would recommend you And then the agenda for the closed session, we'll walk.
For personnel?
Yes. 2.23711A1.
Say that again.
Virginia Code Section 2.2-3711A1. Personnel.
Do we need a motion and a second and a vote?
You will.
Yeah.
Yeah, when Justin gets back.
Right.
So I'm gonna do it.
Mr. Mr. Seager's supposed to join us at 6.
We're gonna sing happy birthday to him?
The vaccine rollout is not going great in Virginia. I try to be careful, and obviously the governor and I have different perspectives on so many issues, and I try on the things that are what it shouldn't be political, even if I have critical views of how he's doing it, trying to refrain from being too critical. But it's not going well in Virginia by the numbers compared to how well we're doing in other states. Our neighbors just west of us in West Virginia are getting it done at a much quicker rate. Something that I'm looking at is ways we can try to make that go quicker. If the possibility is relieving some of the requirements on our medical professionals. We have a lot of nurses that are inactive in their licensure, but the reality is nothing has changed with how you give a vaccination, and try to see if maybe we can waive some of those things. Those are some of the things I'm in conversations with folks about right now, and see if that would be something that we could help relieve it to get the vaccinations out quickly. Vaccination in general is, that's actually an issue that I hear disproportionately from constituents in Floyd County. I've got, we collectively have more constituents in Floyd County. The 6 of us who have very strong thoughts about vaccination.
Sure.
More so than in other jurisdictions I serve. And I think vaccinations are very good and beneficial. I was not thrilled that the Commissioner of Health talked about how he wanted to make it mandatory. I thought the way that he talked about that a few months ago did a disservice, and it appears the governor agreed, because then he immediately, said that's not what we're announcing today. So what my aim is to try to get it, to encourage folks and try to make it as readily available as possible. And that's something that on the Education and Health Committee, I think you'll see a few different proposals related to, and one of the ones that I'm trying to, I don't want to put forward if it's not going to be helpful, but I think that we could get more people being able to provide the vaccine than currently. So that's something we'll see in the next week or two, what sort of feedback we get, and that might be something we pursue during the session. And I definitely welcome any ideas, because that was one I got from someone else. Most ideas, it's not just 140 of us in the General Assembly that generate the ideas. It comes from folks like you, it comes from the constituents that we both represent. So I welcome any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I just, in the situation we find ourselves in, weeks or a month can mean life or death for somebody. It's going to mean life or death for somebody if we're slow on the rollout. So anything the General Assembly can do to speed things up. I've kind of watched the numbers, and it seems like we're just not moving as quickly as some places. So appreciate your action on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
As I said before, I appreciate your time tonight, and happy birthday again. It basically covered everything that, I'm concerned with is qualified immunity and anything that infringes on our Second Amendment rights, you know, is, but another one that I'm really against is legalization of marijuana. You know, I think that's a slippery slope, you know, and, you know, those three things, you know, I pay attention to. But, we appreciate everything you do and, you know, standing up for us up there at Richmond. Any way we can help you, you just give us a call.
All right, well, thank you very much. And I appreciate you all making it so easy to talk with you tonight. We will, like I said, we'll officially start next Wednesday. I will be there next Monday. We'll have a few different ways to folks to get in touch with us, because we're probably not going to have, you know, as many people visiting us. We will have ways for that to happen, but it's just going to be a lot more challenging, given the protocols. We certainly don't want to create situations that we're going to be very careful on the protocols, because I do not want, you know, folks from our area coming to Richmond and then leaving sick, and then coming back home and making more people sick. So we're going to be very strict about that. We're meeting with folks in Richmond. But we'll also have things like this Zoom capability. My office has set up an account, so we'll try to schedule meetings that way for folks. So when you know folks that want to talk with us, either with me or the folks in my office, we'll do that. In my office again this year will be Nikki Thacker, who was there last year, and then also a fellow named Michael Walsh, who's replacing Dan Webb, who's moving on to take a different position. But I appreciate hearing from you always, and look forward to doing the upcoming session.
Staff have anything?
Hi, Michael.
Hi, nice to meet you all.
I guess that's all we have then. And like I say, thank you and have a good evening.
Stay healthy.
Thank you. You too. Have a good night.
Alright. What we're going to do, Justin?
I don't know if he's had time to get there yet or not.
We still got, we still got several more.
Yeah. All right.
Mr. Burton, you wanna come up and entertain us for a while?
Gonna juggle?
However you'd like to proceed,
Can you tell stories?
we can jump in and start some training, and if there's not time to finish that up, we can go into
Yeah, we
close,
can-
or however you'd like to go.
We can do that while Justin is getting home before he gets off.
That'd be fun. And last time you had
Can I ask you one question before we crack it up? Steve, can I ask you one question before we crack it up? You let me?
Gonna have to work.
What house on Honey Grove that was 2 miles down all the way?
It's a brush fire.
Oh,
The guy's been burned for 2 days. Down by the little pond before you get to Mike's.
right, yeah, that little pond.
Unless he starts on fire, he's been burning a huge brush pile for 2 days.
Huh.
So they must have been dark. Somebody drew that.
Right.
It's all fire.
Yeah, stand up for me.
I did go here working in public finance, so I didn't think the normally it's up there.
Sorry.
All right, y'all hear me okay with this?
Huh?
Be careful, something fell off on the floor behind you.
The podium leveler has fallen off.
Oh,
Oh,
it must have known I was an attorney getting ready to speak. That's why I went lopsided.
no. It's gonna do one of these. keep
I do
sinking.
appreciate y'all
It's gonna
efforts to keep me humble.
It's gonna keep sinking.
Yeah, if I'm ever in danger of getting a swollen head, I think
Just cut the Floyd.
Bridget can just send me out to the board of supervisors and
Somebody
get me
rigged,
adjusted.
somebody rigged that up while I had you busy.
Did you reason that?
I can't, I mean,
I don't have it.
I see your date when we had that 4-year training. And I went home, I opened my briefcase, because I get a briefcase I keep in my, yes, definitely. Put it on top was the book and the notes off from the last 4 years.
What?
I thought it must have all had business right now, so you should.
Did it come through?
Yes, I just got it.
Did you have a busy Saturday?
No, I haven't been too busy. Oh, I know one thing that I wanted to
So,
mention. I think I've got, we probably, so on this latest CARES money, we had sent, which will be, and everyone else has been working on, it's been amazing, on the money to food.
yeah, amazing.
Yeah, I mean,
Tabitha, the freezers, Angie entering that much data within
Yep.
2 days.
just,
Carla, but Ladina
all of y'all
is
have been absolutely.
Yeah, Ladina was working the phones. I mean,
absolutely, she worked all weekend on that.
Oh, yeah, she called me at 8 o'clock in the morning on Sunday, and I was like,
well, I will tell you, the response out in the community on social media and to me personally has been very gratifying.
Oh, yeah.
And so many people are so appreciative of the efforts that were made.
I took, so we sent 3, Thompson's had let us in, and we
Right.
sent 3 beefs to them, and they're processed. And I delivered that meat on, I guess last week sometime. I just went over and took it and delivered. But I've got the 4 that we sent down to the USDA processor. It's probably going to be ready to pick up this week sometime. I haven't heard from them, but I'm assuming on the timeline it will be. So I doubt I can bring all 4 of them back, so if anybody else,
Do you want help?
if anybody wants to help, let me know.
Yeah,
I don't know what day it would be yet, but.
Well, just let me know, I got a truck and coolers. I got those big
We'll take
coolers.
we'll have to, I know Tony has a lot of room, then we'll have to take it to some of the,
We have,
yeah, you got some freezers we can put it in, but I just haven't heard from them which day it's gonna be, so it'll be a run to North Carolina and back. So if anybody wants to help, that'd be a good
Yeah,
cause.
I'd be glad to.
The other thing I was wondering, do we have any money left from that?
60,000.
Okay. The reason I was asking is, I've got some more slots that I had reserved, in the next couple of months. So if we did want to spend any more money on that type of thing, we can continue to do that if we wanted to, you know.
Okay.
I just filed the 3rd reporting, and then I looked at what we've got obligated, and we've got $60,668 left out of 11.
Have we gotten our storage unit for PPEs and stuff that came in?
Yes,
So is that 60 out of everything or 60 out of the 200?
60 out of everything.
Okay.
We did good.
That's more than I realized.
The 200 went a little over. if I
It
remember.
really didn't. We put the cold storage study
Study
in
on
there,
it, yeah.
and that had been approved back in August, so it wasn't
Right.
really part of the,
Oh, okay.
of that package.
Okay.
But when I had to report it, we had to put it somewhere, and it seemed to fit there better than the other
And that
categories.
just made it look like.
It made it look like
Okay.
we'd gone over, but we really didn't.
Okay. When I talked to Ladina, I hadn't seen the numbers, but she thought we'd just come in just under, it might have a little
And we
bit
did,
of
we came in just under the cold storage study,
One
made
of
that
the-
look a
okay,
little
that makes
over.
sense now.
This is a continuation of the training that was originally scheduled for December 8th and couldn't complete. So I'll just dive right in at the refresher of the Conflict of Interest Act. Start with a quote. Almost everyone in politics nowadays has at least one conflict of interest. We throw that quote in not because it's a commentary on the character of folks in public service, but the fact that in modern life, you've got businesses, you've got retirement accounts, you've got land, oftentimes, and local government touches so many of those aspects of life that it's easy to have a technical conflict and should be on guard for those conflicts. The purpose of the Conflict of Interest Act is to ensure, number one, that all levels of government remain untainted by corruption, by prohibiting involvement of legislative members in certain activities, contracts, or votes wherein their judgment would be clouded by personal interest, thus no personal interests in a transaction. And here, legislative members means not only members of the General Assembly, but members of local governing bodies as well. Another purpose is to establish a common body of law on the subject of conflict of interest, so that there's consistency throughout the Commonwealth, and to promote openness through the requirement of disclosure of certain interests. That's to so that the people can be assured that when their legislators and local officials are making decisions, that they're doing it in the public interest and not because of some undisclosed, unknown financial interest. Note that this is a general presentation in nature, and if you have questions about any specific situation in which you might find yourself, let's discuss it before you move forward with taking any action. In general, most prohibitions and requirements regarding the Conflict of Interest Act center around contracts and whether there's a personal interest in the transaction or the contract. Thus, it's logical to start with the definition of what is a personal interest. The Code of Virginia defines a personal interest as a financial benefit or liability accruing to an officer or employee or to a member of his immediate family by virtue of ownership in a business or an option to buy in, if the ownership interest exceeds 3% of the total equity of the business, or would result in ownership of real or personal property valued in excess of $5,000, annual income that exceeds or may reasonably be anticipated to exceed $5,000 from ownership in real or personal property or business. Salary, compensation, fringe benefits, etc., paid or provided by a business that exceeds or may reasonably be expected to exceed $5,000 annually. Ownership of real or personal property if the interest exceeds $5,000 in value. Or a personal liability incurred or assumed on behalf of the business if the liability exceeds 3% of the total equity of the business. What's the definition of immediate family? The prior definition reaches not only financial benefits or liabilities to members of governing bodies, for example, as relevant here, but also to their immediate family. And under the code, for the purposes of the Conflict of Interest Act, it's a very narrow definition. It's not typically what one would think of as immediate family. It means a spouse or any other person who resides in the same household as the officer or employee and who is a dependent of the officer or the employee. This is, again, very different from what most people's common understanding of immediate family would be. Official action is generally prohibited under the Act when you are personally interested in a transaction, and if there's not an exception to permit you to move forward, it at minimum requires disclosure and disqualification from the transaction. There are certain situations where you can disclose the transaction and proceed. For example, if you have a personal interest that affects many people, such as everyone who owns real property in the county will be affected by this regulation that's being adopted, or you're a member of a profession or an occupation that is equally affected by the proposed transaction, you may disclose, disclaim, and proceed. Whenever you encounter a personal interest in a transaction, disclosure is required, and if you're proceeding under the group of, they call it the group of three exception, when you're a member of a profession or other class of individuals who are equally affected by the transaction, it does require either a written or verbal disclosure that day or within the next day. Proper disclosure when invoking the most common exception is that group of three exception. And proper disclosure would require the statement of the transaction involved, the nature of the officer or employee's personal interest affected by the transaction, and the fact that he or she is a member of a business, profession, occupation, or group, the members of which are affected by the transaction. And finally, and this is important, especially for the public faith in our government decisions, that he or she is able to participate in a transaction fairly, objectively, and in the public interest. There are other situations that generally are more rare. One example is if your profession is to represent others before a board. Usually this is an exception invoked by attorneys, but sometimes by real estate agents. That if you're involved in a transaction, that a party to the transaction is a client of your firm, but he or she does not personally represent or provide services to that client, and certifies that he or she is able to participate in the transaction fairly, objectively, and in the public interest, then that's another basis to move forward, notwithstanding the technical conflict of interest. What is a transaction under the Conflict of Interest Act? Well, it's any matter considered by any governmental or advisory agency, whether in a committee, subcommittee, or other entity of that agency, or before the agency itself, on which official action is taken or contemplated. It includes votes, but also consideration beforehand if official action may be contemplated. So participation would not be permitted if you have a personal interest in a transaction, even in the discussions before a vote. This does raise the question if in some occasions a member of the board is required to disqualify him or herself. Does the board still have authority to move forward on the question? There is a savings clause in the Conflict of Interest Act that reduces the required level of quorum, and the amount of what a majority would be is reduced proportionately to those members who are abstaining due to a Conflict of Interest Act matter. And this savings provision does require disqualification under the Act and not absence or other reason for not voting or participating. The Act also requires the filing of certain disclosure forms, as I'm sure you are all aware. It is required as a condition of assuming office, and thereafter must be filed annually on or before February 1st, and no earlier than January 1st of each year. The forms are dictated by code. One of the good reforms that's come in recent years with the Act is that the Ethics Council has established a website that is fairly helpful in finding not only Conflict of Interest Act opinions, contacts for the Ethics Council, but also the disclosure forms that you need. There are typically lesser levels of disclosure required for members of the governing body or of local or regional authorities having the power to issue or spend funds in excess of $10,000 in any fiscal year. This would be your economic development authorities, your industrial development authorities. And typically you file a lesser form unless the governing body, you all, have required a higher level of reporting. I'm not aware that Floyd County's adopted any higher level.
For some reason, they're now making the EDA file a statement of economic interest. And that's not us at a local level, that's the state.
That's the state requiring that.
They changed that recently. They changed it in June.
And it's the same one we fill out.
Same one you fill out.
Justin, that whole text.
That is,
Justin's home.
I would always follow what the Ethics Council
What they
prescribes.
said.
There is authority under the Act to require persons occupying positions of trust, as determined by the local governing body, to file the higher level of disclosure forms as well. That's done by ordinance. And again, I don't believe that Floyd County has designated anyone in a quote-unquote position of trust. And there are additional forms for members of other boards as applicable. Real estate disclosure forms for planning commission members and other officials that we're not really concerned about here. Typically the forms specifically set out the required disclosures, but we're generally talking about liabilities to any one creditor, securities in any one business, annual salary and wages, and interest in real property in excess of $5,000. Payments of more than $100 in the past year for attending talks, meetings, conferences designed to educate the person or enhance skills on issues relevant to duties as an officer or employee of the public body. Compensation in excess of $1,000 for representation of any business before any state governmental agency. And gifts or entertainment with a value in excess of $50. And again, the Conflict of Interest Act Council has the forms which you need to fill out. There are also prohibitions of certain gifts under the Conflict of Interest Act. Gifts over $50 must be disclosed on your disclosure forms if they are received from a registered lobbyist, a lobbyist principal, or a person, organization, or business who is a party to a contract with your body or who is seeking such a contract. And if the value of a single gift exceeds, or a combination thereof exceeds $100 in any calendar year, it is prohibited to accept it if it is from one of those classes of individuals, a lobbyist, lobbyist principal, or someone who has or is seeking a contract with the county. Gifts less than $20 do not count for aggregation. One of the questions I typically get in making this presentation is, well, I mean, the Conflict of Interest Act tells me I can't receive a gift. I mean, who knows? My friends and family might receive a gift, or might give me a gift. Do I have to put that on the disclosure forms? The answer is no, unless that person is a lobbyist, lobbyist principal, or someone who has or is seeking a contract with the county.
So can I ask a question there?
Please.
So, for example, one thing that we've been thinking a lot about on with the farm that we're trying to run, and it's owned by multiple family members, and potentially has made me think about just inheriting land. But if land was inherited not from a direct family member, would that then fall under something that we would need to report? For example, if let's say that
Say I passed away and I deeded him a parcel of property.
right, and while we may have been friends, we're not family members, and so
Unless the estate that you're inheriting from is somehow a lobbyist principal, or seeking a contract with the county, no.
okay.
But it would have to be disclosed as a real estate holding,
Sure.
but not as a
Not
gift.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just something that crossed my mind. It hasn't happened to me, but it always, as we continue to expand there, in my situation, it has potential maybe.
That's a good question. But no, if that becomes of course, with any of these scenarios, if that potentiality becomes more of a reality and you want to discuss it, just
Sure.
pick up the phone and we can, it's always best to talk it through with legal counsel, and then we can seek an opinion from the ethics counsel if necessary, or the Commonwealth's attorney.
Right.
And
Well,
we'll,
I just happened to think about it tonight. That's first I thought about it, but I thought, oh boy.
please, and if you have questions as we go through this, just chip in at any time. There are certain exclusions for the gift requirements. For example, offers of tickets, admissions, or coupons to events, things like that. They're not deemed a gift unless they're actually redeemed or used. Honorary degrees are not considered gifts. Athletic, merit, or need-based scholarships are not gifts. Campaign contributions properly disclosed due to another act other than the Conflict of Interest Act do not need to be disclosed. Travel paid for by the federal government or already disclosed due to another act, that those aren't prohibited gifts either.
Can I ask one question about that?
Yeah.
In the past, probably before my time, the school would offer tickets, I think, or passes to the board for athletics at school for like a year pass. Would they be considered, because of the relationship with us, how would that be considered? That be considered a gift, or would that be considered as?
The schools are providing you with
Like they have an athletic pass that would get you into every game. I don't think it's happened in years.
For several years, but it one time.
One time I know that.
Right.
And in this situation, the gift giver is the schools?
The school,
Yes.
the school would give each board member a pass that would allow them to a basketball game, or,
Football.
that would be $5, to get in there.
Volleyball, whatever, you could, any of the school
Any of the activities you could go to for free.
The schools, the Floyd County schools are not a lobbyist principal,
Right.
or, contracting entity. It's another government entity, so I don't think we've got a problem there. This is really, I think, typically aimed towards someone getting tickets to the Redskins game or
Where do you sign up for those?
From the lobbies.
from a
When we
lobbyist.
first went on the board,
After the next draft, I might consider it, but.
Football
The
team to be
Washington
exact.
football team.
Yeah.
It used to be Redskins tickets would get offered.
Washington team now.
when we first went on the board, Ford Fest was giving us free passes. You know,
We used to get them.
yeah, we had,
That would be something we
You'd want to
we
redisclose.
want to discuss, what if you're considering redeeming that. Because if it sits on the coffee table and is never used, it's not a gift, but if you redeem it and actually are considering using it, that we'd want
or as I know, nobody
to
ever.
run through.
Yeah, but Yoga Jam has done it more recently, and I never used it because I didn't want to have to
Right.
disclose
Well, a lot of these changes, they are called the McDonald Act.
That's
Is that where the change
A
comes
lot
from?
of these changes
Yes,
were
exactly.
They call it.
Very near the time.
But that's what it,
That's right,
that's what it should be called.
absolutely.
That's when it all started.
It's
Low downhill.
there's no doubt that that caused a lot of extra scrutiny on this
Indeed.
topic for
it,
sure.
and properly so.
Yes, indeed,
Yes.
absolutely.
But kind of tying into your question, gifts related to your private profession or to your volunteer service of yourself or a family member, those aren't prohibited gifts.
Got it.
Food or beverages while attending an event in performance of your official duties. If there's food offered at an event where you're acting in your capacity as a board member, that's not considered a gift. Food and beverages at admission fees if you're a featured speaker or lecturer. Plaques, mementos, trophies. Travel for your official duties, not considered a gift. Devise or inheritance, as the Mr. Yoder's earlier question brought up. Gifts less than $20 in value, as we mentioned. Attendance at receptions where food can be conveniently consumed standing and walking. This is the cocktail party exception.
Oh,
Buffet.
I'm assuming there's.
T-bone steak might not be the same.
You can work it right.
My own read on that exception is you've got a bunch of legislators who are involved, invited to lots of things because people want to meet with them and talk to them.
Yeah.
And it would be hard to go from event to event and kind of keep track of
right.
the cumulative value
Yeah.
of your food and drink. So I think that's your cocktail party exception, as I said. There are a bunch of additional exceptions, but none that I think are particularly relevant for our discussion. There are certainly prohibited contracts under the Freedom of Information Act. An officer or employee of a local government may not have a personal interest in any contract with their own entity. I think that's something that we've gone over before. And this extends to prohibitions, or this prohibition extends to contracts where the spouse or family member of the officer or employee has a personal interest of $5,000 or more in a business. And an officer or employee of a local government may not have a personal interest in a contract with any other agency that is a component of that officer or employee's agency. So if you would potentially have a contract with one of the departments or subdivisions of the county or authorities of the county, where the county funds it, constitutes it, appoint board members, that's time for caution there. Probably a prohibited contract. And generally, this is just general ethics. Officers and employees cannot accept money or other item of value from a private source for doing what they're legally obligated to do by the nature of your position as a board member or other officer. Prohibited from using confidential information for the officer or employee's own personal benefit or the benefit of another. That's prohibited. Cannot accept money or other thing of value for using influence to obtain a public contract for someone or some entity. So your general good ethics in government.
And part of that could be, I ran into one case years ago that where I heard of a case years ago where someone said, well, I know that, like, they were trying to get, I forget, some type of contract with the county. And they said, well, I think one of them had said to the person that was an elected official that, I know you can't take anything from me now, but when you get out, there'll be a job waiting for you, you know. So, I mean, that would essentially be anything other of value that would be promised would be prohibited. I mean, that.
Yeah, I would think that the promise is a thing of value that
Sure,
you're
that's
accepting
what
at
I'm
that
saying,
point.
yeah.
You're absolutely right, and the alarm bell should be going off in a scenario like that.
Who knows, come to mind from years ago.
Well, it was briefly before I joined the firm, but Mr. Cornwell and my colleague Mike Bedsall represented a few of the members of that coon dog case. So I've heard many war stories about the coon dogs, and interesting scenario for sure. Violations do have consequences. So in the past, knowingly violating any part of the act constituted a Class 1 misdemeanor. As of January 1st, 2017, a knowing and intentional misstatement on the Statement of Economic Interest is a Class 5 felony. Violation of the act also constitutes malfeasance in office. Malfeasance in office is grounds under the Code of Virginia for removal from office. Additionally, the contracts purchases made in violation of the act may be declared void and rescinded by the governing body, and any forfeiture or any monies or profits made in violation of the act are subject to forfeiture. And 9 times out of 10, political fallout is the largest and most tangible penalty for violations, or even alleged violations in most cases. And so the good rule of thumb is, as you all do, beware, and if in doubt, over comply.
Over comply is a fancy word for more legal.
More legal.
He said it.
And this is, if you don't have that copyrighted, I may put that into my presentation. Be more legal. When in doubt, ask the opinion of the Commonwealth's attorney. Ask my opinion. 9 times out of 10, I will tell you to, if it is a closed case, let's go to the Ethics Council. They're typically able to respond more quickly than the Commonwealth's attorney, and a written opinion from the Ethics Council, based on a full disclosure of the facts, is essentially immunity from prosecution if that opinion turns out to not be accurate.
And it's their job.
Absolutely, it's their job. What they do every day, all the time. And I will say that in my experience, they've always been very responsive to my requests and gotten opinions turned around quickly. So when in doubt, let's talk and we'll get you in touch with the council. As I said, you, in order to rely on an opinion from either the council or the Commonwealth's attorney, the opinion must be issued to you in writing, based upon a full disclosure of facts, relied upon in good faith. Note that any opinion issued will be a public record and subject to disclosure under the Freedom of Information Act. Written opinion of your local government attorney is admissible, and that would be good evidence that you were relying in good faith, but it is not. It does not confer immunity. And I think that it was very interesting because for a few years, in the wake of the McDonald issues, there was, at least for a year or two, immunity that could be granted by relying on your local government attorney. And I think that became, I don't think the local government attorneys wanted to have that. So we actually, I think, generally requested that that not be put on us. So the FOIA Council, this is what they do every day, all the time.
Right.
Or the FOIA Council, I should say.
And they're also separated to the point that, I mean, it's probably difficult for you in your position to be able to, if I really wanted to do something and you had to say no, and I'm voting on who our attorney's going to be, it's much easier to go, I mean, it'd be much more sound to go to an outside group that would be able to give an unbiased.
For appearances' sake,
Sure.
and for, especially for those in-house local government attorneys that really can have
Right.
a lot of pressure put on them.
Absolutely, yes.
It's just, it's better for all those involved that we have a outside entity providing an opinion. But even without immunity, the advice of your local government attorney is important. Oftentimes we can anticipate the bumps in the road and steer around them if we talk about it ahead of time. Do remember that the Conflict of Interest Act is a minimum standard, should not be the end of your consideration of your behavior, and it never is. I'm sure you always are considering not only the minimum standard, but what's ethically appropriate in every case, but it always bears repeating that it is a minimum standard. A second point is that the public often thinks that many things that are not in fact conflicts under the Conflict of Interest Act are conflicts. Perception is often reality, so be mindful of that. You can comply with the requirements of the COIA and still members of the public be concerned about it. And one of the key examples with that is that I mentioned earlier. There's a very narrow definition of what a member of your immediate family is. It's a spouse
Right.
or someone who lives under your roof and is a dependent. So many people in the public would think that an adult child living in the home or even living outside of the home, well, that's a member of the immediate family. It's not under the Conflict of Interest Act, but many members of the public would regard that as something to avoid anyway. So be aware of that. All local elected officials are required to take the COIA training within 2 months of taking office, and once every 2 years thereafter. There is an online system for that provided by the Ethics Council. It's a fairly short online course, and you can certify, I think, immediately after completing the course. So that's fairly painless.
But that's what we're doing here, right?
No, this is filing a statement of economic interest. You did the conflict of interest training a couple of months
Right.
ago.
In October,
I
right?
actually took it online, so I'm
Yeah,
not
you
sure.
did.
I guess you need to check to see if I've got that
Okay.
filed with you.
You let me know you'd taken it. It was the VECO meeting, I believe, or something.
Okay, all right.
So you should be in compliance for your next few years. And that concludes our, this runs into the program that we discussed at the last meeting, so that concludes our conflict of interest training. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to discuss. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation.
Pretty timely since we just gave out statements today.
Yeah.
It worked out well.
Was you gonna call Justin, you want me to?
You go ahead and come in, on
Cindy, I think maybe I was thinking of the Freedom of Information
Yeah,
training.
boy, yeah.
'Cause I took that online. I'm not sure if you've got a copy of that or not.
Hey, sir. You are now live.
Yeah, I took a motion to go into closed session under 242-37.11-A1.
I'll make that motion.
Motion, I have a second.
Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Ryan?
Mr. Coleman? Mr. Yoder?
Yes.
Ms. Cookenbook?
Yes?
Mr. Booth?
Yes.
Mr. Turman?
Yes.
Motion passes.
And just to clarify that, it's 2.23711A1, the personnel exception, and it's for discussion of candidates for employment.
Yep.
Joe, do you want me in there or not?
Miss
Cookenbook?
Yes?
Mr. Yoder?
Yes.
Mr. Booth?
Yes.
Mr. Turman?
Yes.
Motion passes.
I'll take a motion at For a certification motion that we already discussed those things that we went into closed session.
So moved.
Second.
Motion is second, please.
Ms. Cookenberg?
Yes.
Mr. Yoder? Mr. Coleman?
Yes.
Mr. Booth?
Yes.
Mr. Sherman?
Yes.
We're back live.
Well, the next item on the agenda is the county administrator's reports, a discussion of the change order on the CCDC.
I have a question. Are they asking for additional funds or just to switch around within existing funds?
I would say they're asking for additional funds, that they would need more money to do the things to comply with the DEQ and the VDOT.
Well, I will go on record as saying this, that it boggles my mind that on item number 2, knowing what that road does in the rain, how all of a sudden this is like something that should have been known. I mean, VDOT is requiring 100% containment in each grade. Well, did nobody meet with VDOT beforehand? Did these Frith contractors or the architect? I mean, I'd like somebody here talking to me about appropriating this kind of money. I appreciate the fact that they tried to get the price down, and appreciate the email thread showing what they had done, but that doesn't change things. That
Would you like for me to ask Erica Sunshine, who's the project manager from Thompson and Litton, to come to our January meeting, or our next January 12th meeting? And maybe Dr. Wheeler also?
I was gonna say, the school, whatever we do, the school needs to be involved in it.
Well, yeah, and we need to talk to the school, to Dr. Wheeler. It's between Dr. Wheeler and the school board and the contractors. So I don't know that I necessarily need a contractor here. Now, the architects and Dr. Wheeler are definite.
yeah,
Or Dr. Wheeler, but
Well, I mean, wouldn't that be Erica Sunshine, who's the project manager?
I would
She's a
think that
person
she
that
is the
doesn't-
project
Yeah.
manager. Then
Well, I think the way I would put it would be, it's whoever Dr. Wheeler would like to bring along. I mean,
Yeah.
it's his project.
yeah.
yes,
The
it
school-
is.
and the chair of the school board, whoever they would like to bring, but we would, if they want additional money, they're gonna have to explain it.
They need to come and explain and answer some questions. Now, the DEQ requirement, I would have thought that with the sediment pond being on school property, that would have been known that had to be fenced.
Exactly.
Even though there's not constant water in it, it's still a hazard.
These items seem to me, I am not in construction engineering. I do not claim to be a construction engineer, but it seems to me that these items should have been known.
Wasn't there a contingency built into the contract anyway, that was into the budget?
Yes, but I don't know how much, but yes, there was some extra built in.
Yeah, I guess where I'm going at is some of these items are, maybe that's what the contingency is there for, the school board could handle that within how, I mean, we've approved the project within that budget. The only reason that we would need, I would think the only reason we would need to approve it if they went over the contingency.
I
Well, see, that's what
I
I'm-
know that we have to sign off on the change order.
We do.
We have to approve it.
But not necessarily appropriate money, I guess is what I'm saying.
See, if they can do it within the contingency and within the 14.5, whatever we set,
Right.
then I don't think we have to approve the money moving around.
I mean, I understand
We have
that we're the legal entity and have to sign off on it, but I think the question for us is, are you looking for more money out of fund balance? Or is it within the contract to where you're moving money from contingency to cover costs, you know, in a normal, what we expected to begin with?
I thought that's what they was doing, because I may be looking at something wrong, or looking at something that said they priced down to 95 from 165,000.
That was negotiated
And
down.
then the other one was down 80,000 down to 67,000.
Well, that was,
We'll negotiate down.
yeah, they had negotiated that down, that's what this email thread was. But as far as I'm concerned, I am gonna keep, I mean, I know the board has approved this project, but I think the citizens of this county are owed a proper continual check on how monies are spent.
I completely agree with that, and, I mean, it's also the responsibility of the school board there.
Absolutely.
So, what I don't wanna do is somehow circumvent the school board, because we're trying to do their job. We've given them a budget, and then now it's their job to follow that budget. And,
But ultimately, we have to sign these change orders.
right, but if it's within the budget,
Only from a technicality standpoint.
right, if it's within the budget, then it is the purview of the school board. If it falls out, if it starts getting outside the budget, that's when
We kick
we
in.
kick in, and that's when there's gonna be some serious questions, in
Yeah.
my view, but.
Yeah, and I'll say again, I just find all of these items on these change orders to be things that should have been known, the fence, the retention pond, even the soil in the new parking lot. I understand that there are soils in our county that can sometimes cause great difficulty, but I would have thought there would have been extensive soil analysis done.
Well, I thought they were, but I know they did borings where they're building the building.
I know, but if you're gonna put a parking lot,
But that was my question, were there no borings done on the parking lot area?
More fish is about to. More fish was put out. They done a lot of backfilling.
Well,
but I agree, Lauren, I hear your point that, you know, we've approved the project, the school board's gotta look at it, but I again say, as a supervisor of the Little River District, and enough people were concerned about this project and came to me, I'm going to keep watching it.
Well,
And I know you're not.
I'm not saying don't watch it, I'm just saying that there's two levels of concern for me. When it goes over 14.5 million, that's when we've got a bigger concern than moving money within the
budget.
the existing budget.
And as far as approving these change orders, I think that's just technicality, like you pointed out, because we're technically the responsible party.
That would be the question I would have is, are we moving money, is this money coming out of contingency
Within the
within
project.
the project, or is it additional money that we would have to appropriate?
Yeah.
And if we're already at that point,
And my other question is VDOT road. This is the
Yeah.
first time I've heard about the new road being up to being a public road, and
I didn't, I like fell over when I read it.
yeah, I was
especially if we're
concerned.
discontinuing where it connects to, if that part is gonna be discontinued down to the middle school, then what's the point of building the new road around the back of the school?
Well, see,
It'd be a dead end at that point.
and I don't know if it was a misunderstanding or what, but, you know, we needed an access road for emergency vehicles to get around, all the way around the building.
Right,
But I wasn't expecting it to be a VDOT standard road.
right.
And if they don't do the VDOT standard road, there may be enough money saved in there to cover some of this other stuff.
We have some unanswered questions.
But I don't know why they chose to make that part of VDOT standard, so.
Yeah, that was out of left field for me.
Yeah.
And two, is that VDOT road creating the drainage problem that they're adding to the drainage problem to where they have to do this other,
Oh, no, you know that road.
I know that road.
I know.
Well, by paving, I think by paving the multiple parking lots and new, I mean, that's gonna cause a lot more.
But I don't even think we're even starting on that road. They're just talking about what's going on in the construction right now. I think the rest of it, from what I can understand, I think there's gonna be more,
Coming, yes.
I think there's more coming down the pipe.
I think we need somebody at our next meeting and set aside time to discuss it and answer questions, and whoever Dr. Wheeler wishes to bring with him is fine. Whether he wants to bring architect, or if he actually wants to bring contractor, or if he just wants to come by himself.
If he has the answers, that's fine.
He has the
Yeah,
answers.
doesn't matter to me. I
Nope.
think he and the school board chairman.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm not saying they vote, that's who,
That's who I would
that's who
think.
we should communicate with.
Yeah.
I'll have them here for the next meeting. Or at least one of you.
Yeah, somebody.
Yep,
Does
somebody.
that sound good to you? Justin?
Bill, we're going.
I'm sorry, sir.
Yeah. Does that sound good to you?
I had to move, and anyway, yeah, that sounds good to me. I think we need a little more information.
All right.
All right.
Next meeting's right around the corner.
Yes, it is.
You want to adjourn or is there
Yeah,
anything else?
I'll just look and see if there's anything else you
That's
have.
it.
That's it. I'll take a motion to adjourn until January 12th, 21 at 8:30 a.m.
So moved.
Second.
Motion is second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.